Terrific. Thank you, Emily, and welcome everybody. Really excited about this morning's program to discuss the upcoming budget for North Carolina, and we have a terrific presenter today. We are a few days away from a budget proposal from Governor Roy Cooper, after which the North Carolina General Assembly will respond with a budget of its own. For the past 2 years, the state has actually operated without a biennial budget due to a political blood feud over Medicaid expansion that resulted in a spending stalemate in Raleigh. Instead, we've operated under an unusual series of mini budgets. Where does the state go from here? And how will the coming budget proceedings impact economic development programs? Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Corey. I co-chair NCEDA's Legislative Committee with Joanna Helms. I'm an attorney practicing economic development law with Nexen Pruitt. I'm located in Charlotte. It's my honor to welcome NCEDA members to today's webinar, introduce our presenter, and moderate our discussion. Before we get to that, I want to thank NCEDA's annual sponsors. Emily is scrolling their logos across your screen right now. These companies and organizations support webinars like this one, as well as other programs. I'm proud that Nexen Pruitt is on this list and grateful that our firm is joined by such distinguished names. Support from our annual sponsors has kept NCEDA and its professional development programs vibrant and visible during this last very difficult year. Now to introduce today's guest presenter, Dan Gerlach. Long before he became a much sought-after economic development and site selection consultant, long before he was interim chancellor at ECU, even before he was president and CEO of North Carolina's Golden Leaf Foundation, many of us knew Dan Gerlach as a key advisor to Governor Mike Easley on budget and fiscal issues. Though he didn't have to work amid such deeply divided executive and legislative branches or grapple with a pandemic, his tenure at the Office of State Management and Budget coincided with fiscal challenges, economic transitions, disagreements over policy, and encounters with more than a few large egos. Some of the disputes and controversies that existed then seem of perhaps a different scale. The challenges of 2021 are very different, and in some respects more daunting. What hasn't changed is the importance of the economic development programs that are funded and impacted by the state's budget. They remain a primary concern of NCEDA and its membership. No one is in a better position to guide us through these issues than Dan Gerlach, and we're pleased and delighted to have him with us this morning. Dan, so happy you're with us. Everyone should know Dan is riding in on a wave after the Fighting Irish's big last-second buzzer beater victory last night. And I did want to also point out that Dan hails originally from the cradle of North Carolina economic developers, Dublin, Ohio, along with our friends Chris Chung and David Spratley. So he hails from kind of economic development royalty area. So Dan, welcome and take it away.
That's High Cotton. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I've been channeling for about a year. I've been channeling my inner David Spratley by not wearing a tie at any time until today. So you are High Cotton. I've put the tie back on, and I'm very excited to join you. Like 174,000 other North Carolinians, I hail from Ohio. It's true, but I got here as fast as I can. So let's get into it. Let me just share my screen here. Let me make sure I bring up the right thing. And I hope, so let's see, can everybody see this? If you can see this, you know, somebody give me a signal. Emily, voice of God, anybody, are we good?
Good to go. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Okay, here's my introduction. That was a gracious introduction, co-written by my dead mother, I guess, but it was incredibly gracious, told you all you need to know. And now I'm a consultant, but I've worked around budgets for the first 18 years of my professional career. And then I ran the Golden Leaf Foundation, where many of you came to see me and to know me then in our work together with NCEDA and all its members. And I know there are a lot of friends of mine on this call today. And so I was honored to have different roles. in terms of working in and around state budgets and in and around economic development. The past impasse, let's go back in history, as was said in the beginning, that the fact that the General Assembly and the governor could not work out their differences on a budget meant that the state had money that it could not return to the taxpayers in the form of tax cuts or could not give it for various programs. Things were kind of locked in place. And you'll be able to get these slides later, but just to give you a sense of it, these bars, the different colors represent different points in time of how much money that the economic forecasters for the state thought we would have at the beginning of each year. So in July 2019, the far left grouping, everybody thought we're going to have about $1.7 billion in unrestricted general fund monies. This does not include, none of these numbers include any money that was actually in the state's rainy day fund, that's in the disaster recovery fund, in Medicaid transformation funds, or any other type of funds that have some designation. This was just unallocated. And so when people are talking about the budget and talking about the money that the General Assembly has to deal with and the governor has to deal with, don't ever say it's raining, let's go to the rainy day fund, because that money's already set aside. This is the type of money that you want to talk about. It drives me a little bit crazy, and I would tell all my clients not to refer to raiding the rainy day fund, because that is bad fiscal policy. So about $1.7 billion in these three bars is what you had to start. Then they said, okay, but had an impasse. What are we going to start July 2020 with? Remember, in between times, in the fall of 2019, that blue bar in the middle of the page said we're going to have about $2.5 billion, we thought, to begin the 2019, the 2020-21 fiscal year. We thought 2.5 billion, that we're going to grow our revenues and spending would remain modest. But then the pandemic hit. And so then in May of 2020, the General Assembly forecasters and the governor's forecasters said, RUT-RO, which is a technical term for we got problems, revised that number downward and said that we would only have $1 billion to begin July 2020, that we would be off about $1.5 billion of where we originally thought we would be. But let's think about this. So the gray bar shows where we actually finished. In other words, although in May, people started getting really cautious, at the end of June, it turns out that we were down, but we're only down by about half. We were down $1 billion instead of $500 million. And I'll get into the reason why that was later. But it was clearly a trend that clearly we may have overcorrected. That's not to say that the people doing the economic forecasting are bright or don't know what they're doing. It is the point that when you're going into recession, you go as conservative as you can, as fast as you can, because if you want to be wrong, you want to be wrong and end up having more money than less money when times are going awry. The implications of this are even more start for the July 21-22 fiscal year, which starts here in a couple months. It turns out that we thought, okay, we're going to have about $3.6 billion in money on the bottom line to start the year off. We were forecasting it in the pre-COVID area. Then we thought in May, it's like, oh, heck, it's going to be maybe $500 million if we're lucky, that small orange bar. But then it turns out, oh no, it's going to be this gray bar. It's going to be about $4.6 billion to start the year off. I believe that number will be actually greater than that for a series of reasons, but they believe 4.6 billion, about $1 billion more than we thought in the pre-pandemic era, which is not the case for many, many states. Part of this reason is because there's actually a shift in revenues. In April, we usually file our final payments for our taxes for the last year, and corporations do in March and so forth. But that all got shifted into July by the federal government to give people a little more time, because we're right in the crosshairs of the pandemic. The federal fiscal year runs October to September, so they would get it somewhere in the time frame. But for us, it meant, oh, this money that we would usually get this, in April of 2020 got shifted to July of 2020. So the numbers we thought would go down anyway, and it turns out was about $1 billion shift. So if you adjust for all this, it turns out that we're right back where we started from. What are the main drivers? Well, the reason why things are good is because if your base is higher, if your revenue base is higher, you don't need to grow as fast to get to a higher number. if I start off with and I'm like some of y'all making $1 million a year versus making $50,000 a year. Hey, if I get a 2% increase, you get a 2% increase, it's a lot more money. It's the same thing with the revenues here. I want to talk about the fact that one of the things that we had happen, which was good for us and shifted right away, is we began to collect more revenue, and the state has changed its tax laws, in my opinion, wisely, to collect more tax revenue from online vendors. To capture one is a greater share of the consumption that was there anyway, that was untaxed, probably unfair in competition to your brick and mortar retailers. The Retail Merchants Association had talked about this for years. And so those things began to collect tax, and they were not taxed before. In addition, people started buying more online. We'll talk about that in a second. Other things I won't talk about as much, but non-wage income, which is generally the most volatile part of the base, right? I mean, this is the thing that really drove us crazy, as referred to in my introduction, when I was working on the budget in the early 2000s, watching the budget in late 2008. When you're a heavy income tax state, as we are, it's generally not the wages and salaries that vacillate as much. It's more the capital gains income, more the dividend income, more things like that that are non-wage. Well, it turns out that in May, when the market was going, who the heck knew what it was going to do, people thought we're going to lose a lot of that base. It's going to be 2009 all over again. But it turns out, hey, the markets recovered quickly, and investors had a great year, or at least a good year, or if you're more competent than me, a great year. For some of us, maybe not as much, but clearly much better than expected. The fact that the General Assembly has taken actions over time to reduce reliance on the corporate income tax, driving it down to the lowest rate, as we all talk about when we're talking to clients of any state that administers a corporate income tax, by becoming less dependent on it, we've reduced the volatility of the system, because corporate income bounces up and down far more than other parts of the economy. So let's look at just how the tax on online sales has moved the needle, right? If you squint, if you're like me, you're looking over your bifocals or whatnot, but all y'all are young and smart and have great vision. And I'll just say this. So the blue bars, those small bars, are what was happening in terms of overall sales tax collections from year to year. So it goes by month, and we'll just start in the left-hand side, see those little bitty blue bars. That was when revenue was growing, tax revenues were growing 4.7%, 4.5% from the previous year, which is about average. And then you see in March revenues, you don't see any blue bar because things are flat. You see in April, May, and June, actually overall tax revenues, sales tax revenues were down, and then recovered after that. But look at the orange bars. In the first 2 months of the year, these are the changes in taxes collected from online merchants. Generally speaking, not all of them. Don't get extra nerdy on this, but just to give you a sense that in the first 2 months of the calendar year, revenues were up about 20%. That was probably on stuff that had not been taxed before, now subject to the tax. So now you're kind of broadening your base, and so you're getting more revenue without having to increase the tax rate, which is, for revenue collectors, is a great thing. But then look at what happened to bars after that. Those orange bars are up in the 40 to 50% range for most of it. In other words, online sales were picking up the slack of other areas of the economy. Those blue bars will be clearly a much steeper drop in April, May, and June, a much smaller increase in the rest of the fiscal year, but it is online sales. It's all those tax collections. When you are shopping from Amazon or whoever and paying sales tax on that drove that, because people were still buying. They just weren't buying, maybe going out to the stores or the restaurants or something like that. Now, I would say that's not to say that everything was doing well, right? I mean, we know that over 2020 from 2019 levels, that the sales tax, the taxable sales in restaurants, bars, and hotels in North Carolina was down. The tax base, not the tax collections, the tax base was down 4.6 billion. So not everybody was doing as well as the online sales of merchants, or at least those of us buying stuff and paying that tax. So it really moved the needle, right? Here's just a change in the overall sales, right? In the sales tax collected. And so what you see is for the year, look all the way to the right, that that overall sales tax collections for the entire year were down, but other tax, excluding everything else online, everything else was down. So if you went to the lumber yard, if you went to buy a new pair of boots to go hiking and be socially distanced or whatever. If you bought that in the store, everything else was negative. Online sales were positive. And the fact is, online sales tax collections were greater than anything else. So that really took us, to use a technical term. And the income tax is also doing well. It's not just the July shift. I talked about how that shifted $1 billion year to year. But in July, income tax collections were up about 900 million. And I'm like, well, where's over my other 100 million, right? Where's my other, $100-some million from that shift? And it turns out that taxes in July were still below on the income tax side. But now through January, and I can tell you again through February, the numbers just came out yesterday from the Office of the State Comptroller. February is a big month. Income tax collections up 12% from February 2019 to February 2020. So that number's outdated, but clearly income tax collections are up already above last year. So really we're making great progress this fiscal year in the income tax. And so how's this so? It's because, the people who have been able to keep their jobs are people who make higher incomes, are not as dependent on having to be in a physical place of work. There's a lot of essential workers who are still going to work, still earning their money, and frankly, some of these other sectors that have had the most precipitous declines in business are not the businesses where their employees earn the most money. It's not to excuse me, criticize any of those jobs. It is to say that that's just kind of the sign of how dependent the income tax is on higher income earners. So the good news is we're going to have all this one-time money, buckets of one-time money, onslaught of one-time money. But how does it look in terms of what we call the recurring money? And I just picked these colors. These colors are not a political commentary. Nobody go report me back to the parties, It's not to say this, it's just to differentiate between what our forecast is and our forecast is and what actual incomes are. So if you cast your eyes on the blue bar, that just shows you the percentage change when I adjust for the tax shift, so that's not in here, from year to year of every year from the previous year. You'll see that all the blue bars, everything's positive, even in the year that ended in 2020. The reason why 2020 was a negative number is because income taxes that usually got collected in that fiscal year got moved over to 2021. Well, even the 2021 bar, that first red bar there at 6% growth, that's adjusted for that $1 billion. So we're going to have a lot of money. And people may sense, oh, great, there's room for recurring money for my tax cuts and my spending increases and my raises and everything else. It's all great. But it turns out that if you look beyond that, at where we think revenue will be in the 3 to 4% growth range, which is fairly where the General Assembly's been trying to keep it. The General Assembly has since 2010 has taken the position that we can't just go, and even if we have the money, we can't just go out there and spend it willy-nilly, because that's how we got the big problems. So if you're looking for recurring money for projects, no matter how worthy, don't blame the General Assembly and don't blame the governor. It's going to be a little tougher time on that. Although certainly there's nowhere near the horror scene that many states are seeing. In fact, that only Utah has survived the pandemic in terms of state revenues as more than North Carolina has. Other states, the majority of other states are losing money. The majority of states, these red bars will be pointing in the other direction. So it is, I'd rather be lucky than good. It's a combination of good policy, maybe fiscal practices, making your tax system less susceptible. The fact that people move here because, like me, who doesn't want to be a North Carolinian, and on and on. So this might temper it some. And then, I can't just say everything is great, because I'd have to trade in my economist license. Just look at some of these non-tax revenues. The investment income the Treasurer expects to collect this year, it's not Treasurer Fallow's fault, but investment income, just because the interest rates are loaded, are basically zero. The Treasurer investment income will be down 80% year to year. Judicial fees will be down year to year because we haven't had court, so you generally can't collect fees if you don't have court. We have to look to see what actually final payments end up being in April and May on the individual corporate income tax. There's still that kind of uncertainty. But the fact that the General Assembly and the governor's forecasters felt comfortable enough to move as far as they did gives me some sense they have confidence in it. And frankly, this growth in online sales tax, which has been carrying that tax base, is not going to continue at 50% growth until the end of time. You're going to see some adjustments because we're taxing things we didn't. You're going to see some change in consumer behavior because people shop online. And basically, it may be that once we start opening up, people stop spending as much money on Schlotsky's purchase over the internet and more on going out and having a meal somewhere in a restaurant or something like that. The key is, will that service economy, on which we do get quite a bit of taxes on especially leisure and hospitality, recover fast enough to when those online sales tax growth abate? And, you know, North Carolina, frankly, we say, oh man, everything's cool, but everything is not cool in terms of the economy. If you look at our neighboring states and look at the US states, the border states of the 4 states around us, and you look at these kind of lines, I'm very bad. I have no PowerPoint skills, as you can tell by the, you know, austere nature of this presentation. But if you look at the North Carolina bars and you see that they're the kind of faint bars, orange bars on the left, orangish type bars, there's no commentary on Emily's alma mater, Clemson, or anything else here. It's just to say is that the labor force for those orange bars for the US is down about 1.7% from year to year. For our border states, it's down 1.2%. So the border state, generally, you would think this region would do better than the nation as a whole. We're not a basket place like New York or Hawaii or something like that. But in North Carolina, the labor force is down 2.5%. These are people who are working and people who are available and actively looking for it, more than twice the border average. That's not good, because as you know, as economic development experts and leaders and recruiters, is what we need is we need a workforce to be ready in both quality and quantity to be able to attract businesses, give them some sense that they can expand with kind of talent that they need. You look at the labor force in terms of employment, the kind of lower bars, we're not out of the woods yet. We still got a lot of, North Carolina's about the national average, down about 6.1% for the year compared to US 6.2, but clearly the border states did better than we are. So we cannot get complacent. That's the biggest enemy that North Carolina faces, is us getting complacent about anything. Because we're awesome, but other states are trying to copy our awesomeness. So leaving on a good note, a couple final slides and then I'll hush. Look at me, right on time here. Leaving on a good note, spending is down year to year. Why is it down? So if you look at the amount of money, and the way I measured it on these bars are how much money was appropriated by the General Assembly but not spent. The appropriations are not a mandate to spend all the money. It's a cap on how much you can spend. So generally, it never, you know, because we have a balanced budget requirement, it never exceeds the appropriation. If it does, there are major problems. But just to argue, for the last couple of years, in June of 2019, we ended in June 2019, about 300 million unspent. In June of 2020, about 345 million unspent. But right now, through February, I would update this chart as of yesterday, it's about $987 million below what we thought we were going to be spending this year. Is this because everybody's gotten frugal? That is part of it. But also what has happened is that we have been allowed legally, completely kosher, federal auditors watching this, North Carolina is rule following, nothing to see here, is that they've used some of this money. One is that the federal government paid a greater share of the Medicaid program than it usually does, which means the Health and Human Services budget is down significantly year to year. And it means that the, and we use some money to pay for justice and public safety people because, you know, they faced a lot of risk. If you were, you know, one of the biggest outbreaks we had was in the prison system, Wayne County. If you're in that prison and you weren't getting some kind of help, I mean, God help you. And so we paid for part of the personnel responsible with that. I'm looking at the reason I'm looking at a chart yesterday released by the Controller's Office, said basically Health and Human Services general fund spending is down about 600 million year to year. Public safety spending down about 24% year to year. Is that because they're being frugal? No, it's because other things are paying for it other than the general fund. Again, totally legit. And there's more federal money coming, people. So the United States House of Representatives is expected to act today on a bill to send to President Biden's desk, which you sign. And look at all this money. Look at it, look at it, look at it. Where the hell was this money when I was working on the state budget? I could have used it. But in any case, $8.9 billion for North Carolina state and local governments. $8.9 billion. All right. So There's some limits on the use of the funds. If you saw the Wall Street Journal's editorial page today, one of the things is you can't use this money to fund your government operations and then substitute out and reduce taxes. You can't do deductions or tax credits or rate cuts or anything else. The General Assembly, I believe, will be haired up about that, but I believe there's probably ways to get there given the healthy situation North Carolina is in if we want to do some tax reductions without jeopardizing giving up this money. The state share of this money is about $5.27 billion roughly. Counties will get about $2 billion, and local towns and cities will get about 1.8, something like that. All total about $8.9 billion. So if you lost revenue year to year, you can use it to replace it. If you need to spend it on something, anything related to COVID, you can do that. You can also use it for water, sewer, and broadband, right? So we are not going to be like most states and have to use this to balance our budget. We can do other things with it. So if I'm y'all and I say this is a transformational year, it could be a transformational year for one-time spending for North Carolina infrastructure, and point to the fact that that federal money explicitly says water, sewer, and broadband, well, I would make a play for that. And so that's certainly good of it. If you're looking at the background, I chose Mitchell County. Mitchell County is what you're looking at. In the background there, Mitchell County is going to get $2,902,176 from this if they decide to take it. If I transfer over here to another virtual background, let's call this, this looks like Calabash to me, down in Brunswick County, it's going to get $664,289. If I'm watching football in the home of Pirate Nation, I see UConda done $24,378,400 for the town of Greenville. And if I'm down in, let's see, North Carolina State, they get whatever they want anyway. And one more, let's pick, well, never mind. In any case, you get the point. Back to the C. So it's everybody's going to get some money, and it's going to be a good deal. All right. So $4.8 billion for all education. This is over on top of the $8.9 billion. Most of this money will go to K-12 education. A lot of it will be used for, quite a bit of it is set aside to use for kind of learning loss, ways to remedy, because, we were talking before we got on, and those of you who have children of school age understand that this has been a challenge for everybody. And $4.8 billion might go a long way. That's for all levels. That's for K-12, for some private schools, and it's also for higher education for community colleges and public and private universities as well. And then $300 million for Small Business Credit Initiative. Obviously, access to capital is something, especially for those of us interested in entrepreneurship and small business. That will be coming to North Carolina. Last time we got it, North Carolina Rural Center administered it. They're the first in the country to get their plan approved. Ranked top 5, if I can give them a shout out for getting that money out the door as fast as possible. In addition, those of you, I don't care if you're for Medicaid expansion or against Medicaid expansion, I'm not taking a position, but if you're to do it, the way the Congress is trying to incent you to do it, if North Carolina chooses to, is to say is for 2 years, we're going to give you an extra 5%, we're going to pay for an extra 5% of your entire Medicaid program. 5%. That equals about $800 million for each of those 2 years for North Carolina. The cost of expansion, which is why people are a little nervous about this, the 10% match for the expansion will cost about $500 million. So, the federal government is like, looky here, look what I got. $300 million in spare cash just for you. You sign up today. No, you sign up. $300 million net profit over the next couple of years. And after that, they don't say. So I think the General Assembly will be a little wary of this, but they're trying to put bait in the water on that. I'm appreciative of your time. I'm happy to answer any questions, especially if they're easy. But I'll do fact, or I'll fake like I'm answering it like I used to do at the General Assembly. Thank you.
Dan, fantastic. Thank you so much for that presentation. And yeah, we do appreciate some Q&A time with you, which is terrific. We've got almost 30 minutes for that, and some questions are coming in. Let me just start really quickly. I won't go through our legislative agenda, Dan, but just to highlight some things and to ask you to repeat almost, because you've touched on a couple things. Money for education that's coming from the federal government to help North Carolina, the money for infrastructure. You touched on broadband. One of our goals is to resolve broadband deficits and to support more affordable connections to the digital economy. Could you just speak to that, the kind of the likelihood that we would find success advocating in that area this year? You're on mute. You're on mute, Dan.
As Bora would say, great success. Yeah, I'm very optimistic about this because there's a bipartisan agreement that broadband is an important issue for everybody, especially with the pandemic has laid this even more bare than that NCEDA had been working on for years. I would say there are three issues with broadband. One is about, are you physically capable of getting it where you live and where you work? The second is, if so, can you afford it? And the third is, do you want it, right? Will you take it up? Because basically a lot of our partners who do this for a business, if we want to make sure that people actually want it, will sign up to take it. So this money will get to broadband accessibility. The General Assembly is very proud of the GREAT program, which GREAT program. Don't ask me what it stands for, but it is for broadband accessibility. I believe that they broaden that beyond their traditional, as they did with some pandemic money early on, to more tiers. It had traditionally been geared towards tier 1 only, and I'm a big fan of supporting tier 1 counties, but I would say that the broadband issues are found in all 100 counties, and we need to work on remedying those. So I believe a more broadly based program will do that. I believe the governor will release a budget, probably not next week, but probably in 2 weeks. And I would look for the governor to be very aggressive. I'm talking the hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of a broadband expansion for this type of thing. Just while we got it, let's go and really be transformative about it. The federal government has put some money in through the bill signed by then President Trump in December of 2020, which they're standing up to help with the affordability issue. And various providers are signing up for that. The FCC has provided rules for that. And hopefully that will get started and run out of money so people take it up and then quit it. So that's an issue. In addition, there's money sprinkled throughout this whole, including the FCC, which I didn't allude to. The bill just was in final form yesterday and I haven't memorized all of it. For these issues of connectivity around hotspots or libraries or schools or anything to do with broadband. So I'm very optimistic on that. Also very optimistic on the parts of the NCEDA agenda that get to non-recurring money. As I said, the recurring money is hard to come by. I'm not saying that there's not all kinds of things. The building reuse program is something that springs to mind that I know you're advocating for that deserves recurring money, but it's going to be a tougher sell than I think this non-recurring money.
Thanks, Dan. Awesome. And before we turn to, we have several questions queuing up. Let me just stick with our agenda again, our legislative agenda, and ask your opinion on this. We want to work to improve faculty compensation for North Carolina community colleges. We note that our community college faculty salaries rank 40th in the nation. So you alluded to some federal money coming in for education. Is that also an indicator of finding success on that agenda item, or your thoughts generally there about community college faculty compensation being increased?
Yeah, the North Carolina community college faculty compared to its peers has lower salaries in either school. At the time, when I was working on this 20 years ago, than school teachers or university faculty. So it was an area for improvement. I think this money, half of it for higher education, half of it has to be used for kind of student relief. Maybe, they're having some kind of emergency situation, but it has to be used for the needs of the student, him or herself. The other half can be used for things related to the pandemic. And I think creative people can get to this, especially whether or not you can get the compensation. I think it would take some art, but my friend Thomas Stith, the community college system president, has a lot of that kind of broad thinking to do so. I would believe that this might be an area where bonuses or some kind of pay increases might be tried. I don't know if it would be widely accepted, Chris, towards areas where you have high turnover, especially in these needs where we all see that we can't our industries come to us and they say, we can't find enough welders or machine workers, or, it goes on down the list. And then we find out that the faculty turns over really rapidly, right? If you're a nursing instructor, which all 100 counties have needs of nurses. If you're an MSN, my sister is up in Columbus, Ohio, and you're teaching at community college, you're giving up a lot of income that if you're working over in the hospital, you can be making more money. So it's an issue, and I think the General Assembly will pay attention to it. I think bonuses are more likely than permanent pay increases. I think looking at whether or not you start to have some differential pay, which is controversial, will be there too.
So let me turn now, Dan, to a question from Steve Yost, who asked, Dan, any idea who the controlling entity will be with the water and sewer funding?
No, dude. I mean, this is kind of a, here's what happened the House passed a bill to add money kind of for state and local governments for kind of generally. And then I think some people question that. I mean, do states like North Carolina, they're doing relatively well. Why don't we give them some guardrails, and why don't we take some of that money and use it instead for infrastructure? And so the compromise was, okay, well, let them use part of their infrastructure, and we'll add another pot of money, which is included in my total, $277 million, and kind of tie it back to the pandemic. So they didn't split the baby, they had twins. And so I don't know who that controlling factor will be, but I believe my sense is to whether run through DEQ, Steve, or through Commerce, they don't know. The governor now has the quandary of having to act fast on a general fund recommendations or having the General Assembly basically have it already done. And he wants to have at least a semblance of influence on it. So he may have to act quickly. But now that this, billions of dollars is a reality, he's going to have to take some time and assess on some time. How do we make recommendations that make sense? We're going to kind of spring it out there. So I think a plan overall of how to use it will be there. But I would think it would go through Commerce, it would go through DEQ, although I've not had any conversations.
Okay, great. So Dan, we now have a question from Don Kirkman. Don asks, can the new federal money be used for other infrastructure improvements? Examples like road, rail, gas, port.
Unclear, probably not, Don. According to my reading of it, and look, I just looked at this 650 page thing, and I'm a supposedly smart guy, but the answer is right now under the current rules, it did not explicitly say you could. If you can tie it to the pandemic, yes, but on those types of things, no. But I would say this is that money that the state might have figured, okay, we're gonna need this much for broadband, water, and sewer. You go use that federal money for that. And then all of a sudden you free up money, totally legit, federal auditors can pay attention, for other stuff like the roads and everything else. So if you said to me, one thing I did put in here in my forecast of what would the General Assembly do with this money, or the governor, one is they're going to put a lot more money in the rainy day fund. Absolutely. The rainy day fund's at a little over $1 billion. I think another amount of money for that. Two is I think they're going to do a lot of repair and renovation for state facilities, including university facilities. Three is I think they're going to shift some money over to the Department of Transportation, which is, did what they were told, that what they thought they were to do is went and built all the roads they could, and then they ran out of money. You can argue about that all day long, but basically they didn't misspend it. They spent more than maybe they should have. So I think part of the money could be shifted over there. And I think part of the money could be shifted into infrastructure. So those are the kind of the big pots where I think, top of mind for Dan, you can use for non-recurring money. Also, Chris, before I'm sorry to interrupt myself, is one thing big in play here is if you could use some of that federal money to help you conform to the federal code. In other words, a hot topic among many businesses is whether or not the General Assembly, the governor and the General Assembly will vote to conform. Right now, if you got a PPP loan, your business got a PPP loan, you do not have to, you can deduct the expenses you used with the income from that loan. You cannot do that at state level because the state was worried about, I think they didn't, it's hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a lot of money. In addition, the federal government also just made unemployment insurance, the first $10,200 of it for the first time ever, tax exempt. And will the state follow suit on that? I mean, and that's, for every unemployed person, about $550. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask a clarification. Isn't the General Assembly taking that issue up to potentially allow those those expense deductions on PPP money? I mean, I just know that, for example, South Carolina is allowing that, and I think the federal government, I could be slightly off. This was information I just got in the last 2 days, but I thought that issue may be taken up by North Carolina, which would.
I could say that the governor's office is, I think the executive branch is taking a strong look at that. I think the General Assembly has some proponents of it, but I don't know. And I'm not going to get crosswise with certain members of the legislature feel strongly that would be double dipping and should not be done. I want that. Anybody on here to go report me back to House Finance Chair, you tell them Dan is like Switzerland on that. So I'm just kind of describing a potential use of it.
Okay. Hey, so Don Kirkman comes back with another question just to kind of further understand some of the federal money. Does the new federal bill provide money to other federal agencies, example, EDA, that
Yes.
could be used for economic development related infrastructure improvement?
Yes, sir. I mean, I kind of gave high level things, Don, on this list. This is not an exhaustive list. It's $1.9 trillion. I mean, obviously I didn't get into the kind of the individual checks, the stimulus checks that'll be coming out soon, that have come out in 2 waves already and things like that. But yes, EDA will get more money from this, maybe a little more flexibility in how to use it too.
Terrific. Okay, I'm gonna move now to a question from Kevin Dick. Dan, if you had to guess, would you see the Small Business Credit Initiative being deployed through one source like Golden Leaf, or through various sources such as multiple CDFIs, community colleges, and so forth?
Tough question. So one is I saw my successor, Scott Hamilton, has signed up. I don't know if Scott was able to make it because he's really busy at Golden Leaf, and I certainly think that Golden Leaf has taken on a great challenge that they didn't have to. Right? They were good citizens and stood up in disaster relief and recovery, and again on this. So hey, Scott's here. So I would not wish that on Golden Leaf. I think there's probably a way to coordinate that. I believe there are a lot of patriots, Kevin, who are looking for that money, but I believe CDFIs are going to be a major, like the Carolina Small Business Development Fund, are going to be a major player in that. So I have no great insight on that. I simply reflecting on how it's been. That money was used from the Small Business Credit Initiative, as people know, for loan participation to help under collateralized loans. I think there's a lot more prescriptive language in there, a lot about it being used for socially and economically disadvantaged individuals who run their companies. Certainly that's a major target and reason for that size of investment, more than 6 times the size of the 2010 program when it was invented. And so I think there's probably room for conversations. And Kevin, knowing you, I'm sure you're reaching out to a lot of patriots to help with that.
Terrific. Let me move to a question from Jen Moore. Jen asks, the Raleigh-Durham real estate market was ranked first nationally in CrowdStreet's recent 2021 report. Likewise, the RTP area is third for life sciences and industrial markets nationally. Do you anticipate any business incentives for these industries to grow, expand, build here?
Yes.
And any other observations?
I do.
About
no, I'm sorry. I was being cute, because that's a major sector for us, right? I mean, look at it. We're growing all the time in that sector. But yes, I believe there will be an increased focus on that. I believe that the university systems, both public and private, are actively involved with the United States Congress and with the agencies. And I'm not going to, speak for them, and try to get money down this. BARDA, Biomedical something Research Development Authority, within HHS got $5.2 billion. And I know there are entities in North Carolina competing for that, because one is reshoring not only life sciences and doing more to assure supply chain continuity and quality in life sciences, but certainly I think about it in the Unifor out in Catawba Valley Community College, where the Manufacturing Solutions Center is. They're in Conover, working with Gaston, the ancestral homes of a lot of our textile and apparel manufacturing, to do more PPE manufacturing. So I think, yes, there will be money for onshoring. President Biden's executive order directly attacks that. And I think there'll be money for that. And I think North Carolina needs to get hold of it. So yes, I believe there'll be federal incentives. In addition, I believe that, we have a new Commerce Secretary, former Biogen executive. I mean, I mean, let's go. We're ready, right? We've got all the, we're well positioned.
Excellent. All right, let's take a deep breath and go to some real money ball here. Here's a question. All right, Dan, from a political standpoint, what is North Carolina's future regarding Medicaid expansion?
You know, it's an excellent question. So one of the things that I think, there are two issues there. One is I think about whether or not the Medicaid program itself, there's an audit, challenging audit that Beth Wood just put out on it. Beth Wood, at the time when I ran Golden Leaf, called me her favorite foundation executive. She's my favorite current state auditor too, I would say. But I would say that Medicaid expansion depends on how well Medicaid transformation goes. We have just kind of transformed the Medicaid system. The General Assembly and the governor worked very hard. Secretary Cohen, I think, deserves a lot of credit. It's the General Assembly to kind of work to transform that program. And so as that turns along, and I believe it will go well, then that gives the General Assembly and others confidence. Okay, we're not putting money into a broken program, right? We're putting in money, high quality. And so if we expand it, but transformation was a precondition for that. Two is I think the additional federal money certainly should get attention and should get discussion. Whether or not anything happens on that, I don't know. But I believe that this was a big deal. And obviously Governor Cooper has put all his chips on it in the last couple of years. And so we'll see what happens. But I think those two things are kind of the preconditions for Medicaid expansion in North Carolina.
Okay, great. Dan, when you think about North Carolina's toolbox for business recruitment, and you think about our toolbox for economic development incentives, have you ever thought of maybe some program or something that would make sense that we don't currently use? Just curious if you've ever thought about, we need an incentive that accomplishes this or that fills in a gap here. And maybe your general thoughts even on that question, not only what you might think is missing, but maybe your thoughts about our current tools even, and how effective they are.
Sure. So I was there in the Easley administration when the Job Development Investment Grant JDIG was embedded and so forth. And you see that type of thing made us competitive, and I think continues to make us competitive. North Carolina, because we are a low tax state, has advantages that other states have to use incentives to catch up to us, right? And so that's always been part of our sales pitch. And we need to make that part of our sales pitch. Now, you're talking to a guy who did operations and not sales for most of his career. So I was in there with Jim Fain and Keith Crisco and Sharon Decker were coming in wanting money. And I'm like, nah, I don't know about that. I'm like the manager in the used car place. Like, I'm not too sure. So that's kind of a tough question. But here's what I would do is we have to get more sites ready today. I would take the model of the Site Infrastructure Development Fund, which we used for the first time for Merck out of Trayburn. And if anybody thinks we haven't got our monies out of that, that's unbelievable. But I would say, let's go and develop sites now and collaborate with the counties. Maybe the counties and cities or nonprofits get the land. Maybe the state help develop it, because every other state is doing that. And we have been competitive for some of these major industrial projects, but we have not won as many as we want. And the other states aren't sitting around waiting for us to get our turn. They're continually improving. So that's an area where I believe right now at this one-time money, I would say that's time to be transformational. The second thing is, since I got here in 1995, I've served on over a dozen commissions looking at the North Carolina tier structure. And I think everybody, this year when Mecklenburg was in about that close to getting into a tier 2. And could you imagine if Jones County and Mecklenburg County were in the same tier? Everybody would freak out. And you see right now some counties complaining they're in tier 3. How are they in tier 3? I would say the tier system, it should be a guidepost, not a mandate. In other words, we all know that there are 20 counties that are going to be in tier 1 for the rest of their lives. We all know that there's counties that are doing very well and will for the rest of their lives. And what we have to figure out is, let's kind of use these things as guideposts when we're doing incentive programs, but not hard and fast lines, right? I mean, if you're out in Siler City in the western end of Chatham County, you don't feel like you're in the top ranked, and it's nothing against Siler City, it's a wonderful place, but you don't feel like that's the kind of place that's the top ranked county in terms of, on the tier list. It's the least distressed county in the world, right? So I think kind of using tiers, I would just, not try to monkey with the tier system, not trying to add factors, not trying to exempt people, not trying to give them grandfathers. I would let it go and just say, let's use these things as kind of indicators, because the difference between county number 40 and 41 and county number 80 and 81, which makes a difference what tier you're in, well, I mean, there is no difference, right? And compared between county 41 and 80 in tier 2, or county 1 and 39 in tier 1. So that's in even 81 and 100 in tier 3, right? So those are two things that I think North Carolina can do and should do to get ahead. But I wouldn't go and try to figure out all kinds of other programs. I would just use the flexibility of the programs we have to get after it.
Let me just ask you, you observed and you have the chart showing how much we increased in our e-based economy sales tax.
Yes.
Right. That so much internet commerce happened in COVID and in lockdown. Just curious, like do you reach any conclusions about that? What that maybe unintended, or maybe unintended is the wrong word, but just impacts to North Carolina's economy as that transition takes place? You know, doing economic development law, certainly see so many kind of industrial developments taking place. So much of it, the logistics centers, we're transitioning to this kind of this new model. Just curious if, you know, this strikes you in any way of, oh boy, this means this result or something. I mean, look.
Well, as you hint at, maybe if I'm missing the point, just kind of, you know, look at me like, what are you talking about? But in old days, it's before you had what was called nexus, right? It's before you had some kind of connection, usually a plan or employees or something in a state. If you were selling a lot in that state, but you didn't have nexus, you didn't have to collect a tax. So a lot of us worried about whether or not, you know, if Amazon, for example, I mean, created a warehouse, think of all the people now, Amazon now employs in North Carolina. You know, is that a risk, right? I mean, because they would concentrate their employees in states where they had nexus already, kind of, it gave you an incentive to locate in small populated states and not in kind of large states like us. Well, that's overcome. And I think business is big enough that that's kind of built into the model now. So it's allowed us to build on our geographic advantages and to do so. And the fact is that more people are collecting it. I understand that from a small business trying to keep up with this, it would be challenging, but the software is probably sophisticated enough. And so the competitive advantage is there. It is not, you know, the wall that it used to be. So I think that probably has had some effect on our thinking here. But frankly, I mean, what it did is because you had those kind of taxes in place and retailers were used to collecting in that way, it probably really, I mean, made a difference in North Carolina and in most other states as well.
Well, Dan, we're winding down now with the last few minutes here. I wondered if maybe, don't mean to catch you off guard, but if you could take a minute or two to just, again, recap the high points of your presentation about what to look for with the budget upcoming, and to let our listeners kind of go away being reminded of some of your main points.
I think that are compared to where we were 10 months ago in May of 2020, when people like me were freaking out that we're going to have to go find 15% cuts in our, even though I don't do it, I still feel for it. 15% budget cuts in our budget, and what the hell are we going to do? And it was going to overwhelm all this money we carefully saved up, and even the money we had unintentionally saved up. So in 10 months, I think the situation is we have a stable economy in terms of economic growth overall. It is camouflaging holes in sectors like where if you're in the restaurant or hotel or bar business, you're down significantly. Employment is down significantly. So we should not confuse the fact that the state's revenue situation is healthy to say that everything is healthy, and to take our eye off the ball and say, oh, we're better than other states. We need to remain competitive. We need to figure out ways to get people back to work. We need to figure out ways to get people back in the labor force to continue when, as companies put their head up and decide to economically recruit. But that said, we have an opportunity too to invest, especially with one-time money, in my belief, in things that could be transformational and make a difference. I've noted broadband of all, infrastructure of all types, including some broadband.
Awesome. That is very helpful. So Dan, thanks. This has really been a wonderful discussion, and I want to thank all of our participants and NCEDA members who have joined us today. Dan, we really appreciate your valuable guidance and one-of-a-kind wit. We do have time, we appreciate the NCEDA members for clearing time on their busy calendars for today's webinar. It seems like the road ahead for North Carolina's budget and fiscal policy could be bumpy in some ways, and certainly for the economy as it continues to adjust, but maybe, as Dan has pointed out, revenue is stabilized for the state. Our thanks again to NCEDA's annual sponsors. We showed you their names earlier. These organizations and businesses offer year-round support of professional development webinars like this one, and for that we are very grateful. Please watch your email for information on upcoming events like our virtual spring conference coming up next Wednesday. There's still time to register. We hope to see everyone for that and other webinars and networking events we have in the works. In the meantime, please stay safe, and thanks everybody for participating.
Chris, if I might, just to say this, is everything that's presented here is Dan Gerlach. That does not represent the views of NCEDA or any of the sponsors. Hating, it's fine. If you loved it, there you go. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Okay, thanks so much, Dan. Really appreciate your time. Thanks, everybody.